we are really fortunate to have our own, from within our own club, our own presenter this morning. Today we have very own Derek Roff speaking on Incra Jigs and fences. Introducing Derek reminds me of the old saying that to be respected as an expert, you have to have traveled more than 50 miles and carry an attaché case. That's the way it was in my business. Well, Derek qualifies because he was born, I know it doesn't qualify for traveling, in Juneau, Alaska, and moved to Albuquerque when he was a child. Joining his father in the garage workshop to make stuff with wood, the first furniture style that he remembers recognizing and liking was that was called Danish modern. A short time later, he became enchanted by the style called Oriental. The disparate labels hide the fact that both styles use strong lines and curves to create simple, flowing shapes that form matters most. Nonetheless, Derek has always been captivated by beautiful wood grain, and he tries to feature it in his woodworking. His knowledge and skills, catch this, young man, back in the back, young man, your name again? Kevin, listen to this part. His knowledge and skills began to improve rapidly when he joined Albuquerque Woodworkers. That's where it all, he was nothing until he joined us. Most of what he knows about woodworking was learned from books, magazines, AWA workshops, and much trial, error, experimentation, analysis, and extensive discussion with other woodworkers. I see him as very much a technician in woodworking. He's a very knowledgeable fellow. A lot of us fake it, he doesn't. Dovetails will hold a special fascination, still hold a special fascination, and when not using those, he prefers mortise and tenon joinery. He is into making benches, ornamental boxes these days, and he spends a lot of time at the wood lathe learning to be a novice turner with a ridiculous number of turning tools. He is always ready to join a discussion on wood technology, woods, and craft. He's now retired, too early, from the University of New Mexico, from which he graduated in 1983. Give me a break. Okay, and continues to teach and promote natural building, energy conservation, and sustainable items. He develops DVDs and other language learning materials with programs for sign language and Esperanto and other languages. Everyone is fluent in Esperanto, raise your hand. There you go. That's why he has to teach it. Derek squeezes in as much woodworking time as he can. He continues to be thrilled to share his life in woodworking with his lovely wife, Dawn. Derek says that for them, yours, mine, and ours results in an ongoing sharing of wood tools, wood, fasteners, body fluids, and working projects. Oh, maybe he didn't put that in there. Help welcome Derek Roff as our instructor.
Forgot to mention the bandsaw.
Yes, well, when I met my very beloved wife, Dawn, first time I visited her house, before you get to the front door, as you enter under the portal, you see a 29-inch bandsaw. She had not mentioned this previously, but I already believed this was the right woman for me. But when I saw that bandsaw, then I was sure.
You still have the bandsaw?
We still have the bandsaw. One of two that we use pretty actively. So I put in the newsletter what I hope to cover this morning. And over the last week, I've practiced and refined and adjusted and concluded that I was really overly optimistic. So we will not probably be able to get to everything that I mentioned. But we're going to focus, for the most part, on things that aren't the fancy joinery of the Incra brochures, but the everyday essential joinery and activities that you do, whatever tools you have, whatever router system or other system you have. And we'll see why the Incra system offers a few advantages for doing some of these tasks. So we'll do some mortise and tenon. We'll do some shaping. We'll do some other sorts of things. And I'll try to the extent possible to say, if you don't have this, how else could you do it? Now we have in the silent auction the signature edition of the Incra Jig Ultra system. This is the Norb Siska Signature Edition, never used. He brought it here in part to offer it to a club member who wants to bid on it, and the money goes to the club, but also to help me, because there's a lot of activity going on here, and there's no way the camera can get down and show you that. So I'll be using this as a visual aid to say, okay, here's the hairline cursor I'm talking about. Here's the template that I can slide into position. Those sorts of things I'll try to reference by holding this up and then do them actually here. And thank you, Norb, for bringing that in. I welcome questions as we go along, but sometimes it seems like the questions are designed to show off how much the audience member knows. So I welcome you to ask about things you want to know, but think twice before you ask about things you want to tell us that you know. If I've forgotten something important, great, point it out. But otherwise, think about, are you contributing to the flow of the information for those people who need that information? And at any time, feel free to stop me. Now, safety is always a concern. I have here a safety interlock switch. We talked about trying to build these, and I have not been able to get a line on the parts at a reasonable price. And I could have put more time into that. I still would like to have a workshop to make them. But what we've got is a big 40 amp conductor relay. And it will not allow power to flow. This is the cord to the router. It plugs into the relay system. Power can't flow unless the foot switch is stepped on and this little button is pushed. Until that happens, the router bit cannot turn. So I think this is a really useful kind of safety situation. A foot switch by itself is almost treacherous, because I put it down here, and then I'm going to be over here, and I say, I think I'll adjust this, and I hit it by my foot by mistake. I'm missing fingers. So don't use a foot switch if that's the only part of this system. But here, unless both things are up pressed, you can't start it. It'll run, then I can release the button, run as long as my foot's on the switch. If I step off the switch, it shuts down. Stepping on again does nothing. So this gives me a level of safety that I feel is worthwhile and helpful. I will still flip off the main switch some of the time. But in general, I feel like I'm isolated enough that I can do height adjustments and other things without having to unplug the router or do some of the other safety things that you might want to if you don't have something like this. So now we'll be going through the relay system that we talked about, plus the relay built into the vacuum cleaner.
Derek, will you be speaking as you're running the router?
Yes, well, not precisely. I'll be speaking back and forth. While I'm actually moving the router, I'll flip the microphone off. So we won't have the router amplified through the system.
All right. Momentarily turn the router on.
Okay. Appears to work. But it hasn't turned itself off. Is this normal? Okay. So we'll have a little bit of a delay like that. Yes, remember your hearing protection. It's pretty noisy when we're even not cutting wood, isn't it? Okay. One of the important safety rules is pay attention. Focus on what you're doing. And I'll be violating that rule to a certain extent because I'll be trying to present. So if you see me forgetting something critically important, like locking down the height adjustment or tightening the bit, stand up right then and tell me, please. Hopefully most of the mistakes I'll make will be minor and inconsequential, but we could have a severe injury if I don't do something like that. So pay attention to me. Let me know if I'm making a major error in safety. Otherwise, questions whenever you want to give them will be welcome. Any questions before we start or to this point? Okay, I've got a number of little sections. All these little envelopes each have a different unit of what I want to show. This system that I have here is what Incra calls the LS, the lead screw system. It's got a 32 thread per inch by 18-inch long steel screw. It's probably about 3/4 of an inch in diameter, so it's not your standard Lowe's screw. It mates with half of a screw under this lever, so that by joining those two together, I'm locked at 30 seconds of an inch. And you can see something of that here on the Ultra model of Norbs. This little black device is a sawtooth rack with those bumps and valleys at every 32nd of an inch. Under this clamp, I don't think we'll get a good look, but inside this area here is a mating set of 32nd of an inch type rack. So it can never be in between. It's always going to be on this 32nd or that 32nd. And that's the principle of getting repeatable, accurate joints. So that works for many, many things. But now and then, you need to be in between. You need to dial something down in by thousandths. And both of these have a device for doing that. In the Incra Ultra here, you open the clamp and push this lever down, and that engages this screw that is marked by thousandths of an inch. So you can go forward or back by thousandths of an inch. Question?
Can you get the system in millimeters?
You can get the system in millimeters. So a millimeter is a 25th of an inch approximately. So it's just the slightest bit more coarse in its adjustments, but basically the same. And all of the parts work, and the scales are in the metric equivalents. And I have one of those. In fact, I have 2 of those, and I've got about 4 of these in English. We live in a mixed system. You know, I would love to be 100% metric, and I aim in that direction. But the router bits are the big problem. You can get probably 20,000 different router bits easily in English measurements in this country. And you can get maybe 150 in metric. So that's where your options really get limited in this regard. But for lots of stuff, when I'm making things, making parts, I measure on metric and scale to metric all the time. David?
You can convert an English unit system to a metric system by replacing those little racks. And it's doable. It's not something you want to do casually. But.
Good point. So all of the parts that define it as metric or English are interchangeable. So if you want to buy another set, you don't have to buy 100% of everything. You just buy a few of the pieces with the 32s and change them over to the millimeters. And it's not a real quick changeover, but you can choose to do that. It makes more sense to do it now and then, once every 6 months or just once in your life. If you're planning to do it back and forth every day or every week, then probably buying a second one in the other unit is easier. Jack?
If you did that, would you have to change the scales too?
Yes, everything that is measured is supplied by Incra for the opposite system if you choose to go that way. So every single template would have an equivalent for the metric and so on. Now, one of the interesting things is that the dovetail, any dovetail fixture, any dovetail unit, it's like a wedge, and it changes as you go up and down what the height, what the width is at any given point. So you can use metric bits with the English scales and make nice dovetail joints if you work out how those dimensions and relationships come together. And there's reasons why you might want to do that. We'll actually see that later in the presentation. But you don't have to. However, the scales do have to be the same. If you're using a metric set of racks, then you need metric scales and templates. Okay, the first thing I would like to show, let me go talk a little bit more about what I've got here. So this positioner and mine are pretty much the same. You've got this hairline cursor. That's what we're setting with our eye. It can only go every 32nd of an inch, so you can very rapidly make this black line line up with the lines on your ruler, okay, or the lines on the templates. The templates in general have two colors and two types of cuts, or two position groups of cuts, A's and B's. But some of the more complex templates have C's and D's. So the system is to work through a set of cuts on the A's. Then you change something, change the workpiece, move from the tails to the pins or something of that sort. Then you'd cut on the B's. And if there's a decorative piece, then you'd put a different piece of wood in, do it on the C's. And at the end, they'd all come together to make the kind of joint you want to make. Now, one of the curious things is this hairline cursor got fatter when they moved from this model to this model. I don't know why. It doesn't help at all. In fact, it hurts. So I scribed my own line. I made it more like this one. I just took out the piece of plastic, used a square and a little sharp carbide scriber, made my own scratch, rubbed a little Indie ink on it, and wiped off the excess. And now I've got a better line than Incra provided me. You can have as many as you want. In fact, this system has two separate windows with plastic. So if you had a reason to, you could have multiple lines. But in fact, I find that just one line is good enough for everything that I do. So in addition to the positioner, what I have here is an auxiliary fence. They call it the Wonder Fence. It's in two halves. So it allows a great range of adjustments, and it has dust collection going through the center of it, so that it does a pretty darn good job in most cuts of pulling out the dust and not getting it around your shop. If I've got the cutter way over here and the fence over here, then it's going to collect less of the dust. But there's a lot of things you do where the cutter's nested in the fence, and therefore you get good dust collection in this system. And again, thanks to Ben, we'll see that in action. So I'm going to remove this temporarily so that you can see what we've got. So this is just MDF, shop-made, sacrificial half fence or sub-fence. So you make a new one of these once every 2 years or so, and when it gets worn or chewed up, it only tends to get chewed up right here at the bit, but that's what you want it there for. The fence itself operates in a similar way. So I've got the most simple fence, which you can do lots of things by itself, but it has no dust collection, and it only has a small opening, so for bigger bits, it's something of a problem. And then we've got these two pieces. This is the hole in the center that allows you to pull all the dust, or almost all of the dust out as you work. Let's see.
Can you get that Wonder Fence to fit the older lead screw?
Yes. Yeah. Can the Wonder Fence fit some of the older lead screw type of fences or positioners? And yes, this is backward compatible, at least as far as the Incra Pro, the one that David has donated to our raffle. And this particular one, I think, is from about 2002. So it's the oldest component I've got up here, probably.
Derek, do you want to show the depth adjustment for the frame?
Later. Thank you. So I'm sliding these in to T-slots. Everywhere around the Incra Jig, there are T-slots milled into or extruded into this system. And so just these simple little lozenge-shaped nuts slide in there, and then it's hard to see and not tremendously easy to use, but the adjustment wrench goes through the hole, picks up a cap screw, and can tighten or loosen. Now sometimes I get it right away, and sometimes I have to open the viewports so I can see why I'm not able to hit it that day. But it works pretty well. And early in the day, I don't do as well as later in the middle of the day, and then later in the day I get worse again. It's a normal sort of thing. This little plastic flap covers the middle area, so as these slide apart, to use bigger bits, I still maintain my dust collection reasonably well. Now, the parts that David mentioned and that will come to the fore in the first section, which I'm about to get to, is the fact that there are offset wedges on each of these pieces. So one wedge here in black, one wedge here in gold, and these can be slid in their relationship to each other. So that pushes one half the fence forward or back. Both of them have that, and what we're going to do to begin with is jointing using the router table. So we're
Position or ride in a fuselage?
well, sort of depends on our terminology. So I tend to refer to this whole beam as the positioner. It's not really a T-slot. It's a pretty complex extrusion. So you can see there's lots of notches and bumps and hollows in the profile of that. This base is screwed solidly, 4 screws, onto my router table. I used inserts, and I actually put 3 sets of inserts. So if I'm ever trying to do a really big item, I can pull this all the way back here and get a tremendous range of travel. But usually that's a pain in the neck. I'm working up here and having to reach way back there. So I normally keep it in the more forward position so that the lever is close to where I'm standing and working. Gives me less travel, but enough for almost all of the projects that I do. Does that cover your question?
And what is roughly the travel, what if screw down one spot, what's the travel there?
I think that it is 19 inches. They make 2 models these days, 19 and 25 or something like that. 19.
That one there is 16.
Yeah, so they've modified their distances a little bit, but this one is 16. I think this one is 17. And then I have an Ultra at home that is the bigger one. Those days, maybe it was 35. It's absurdly large. It was designed to be used also on the table saw. And at that time, I thought I was going to do that, but I ended up buying the whole table saw arrangement, which is a very nice setup. And then you can have up to 52 inches of travel if you want the full scale that many, like a Biesmeyer fence, gives you the 52-inch cutting to the side of the blade option. Incra gives you that too. And you can build your router table into your table saw table if you want to have it all there together. So they've thought through all of this. Those options are even a little more pricey, but they work very well. Okay, so how many people here have a jointer? Pretty good percentage. How many have a spiral carbide head? Okay, so about half of the jointer owners. So how many of you have a spiral carbide head that costs less than $50 to buy? That sort of closes us all out. Well, I'm going to use an upcut spiral bit. It costs, I think, $35, half-inch diameter. And I'm going to use it for jointing. Obviously, my jointer has long tables, other advantages. I can't face joint with this. But there are plenty of times when this is the better choice. It has the advantages of tear-out reduction. My spiral head works great. But if I'm making a little jewelry box and looking at things close, there's no way that a big head like that can give us as smooth a cut as a tightly machined little router bit like this. The quality of a white side bit is just phenomenal. So it gives me a smoother finish, less grain tear out. What else did I put in my notes here? You're unlikely to nick this bit. You're probably not going to nick your carbide bits either, but if you have steel bits still, you very well might want to do a lot of your edge jointing on your router table. Because again, you've got a carbide that's hard to nick, and if it nicks, it's $30. instead of sharpening your joiner knives, which takes a few hours, or you take them over to precision sharpening or whatever. It's much harder. It was very hard for me when I owned steel knives because I sharpened them a lot, and it was a big downtime. Just
You do any snipe using that approach?
no, I will show that there's no snipe issue. So what I'm going to do to start is to offset one of these fences. I've found that 15 thousandths for the outfeed table to be proud 15 thousandths is a good general position. If I had to remove a whole lot of rough surface, I might want to go higher. But it may take me 2-3 passes to get just the perfect finish. So that's what I normally start with. So I will do that offset. And unfortunately, you can't see anything really very interesting, except this is engraved. This scale has lines every 2 thousandths. So I've got 1 there that represents 10 thousandths, 2 represents 20. I'll go halfway in between for 15 thousandths.
Derek, can you offset an angle off that, or is it just going to be setting it grounded?
It stays parallel. The 2 wedges are matched, so there's not a way with this particular adjustment to do anything with an angle. Hey, got them all 4 the first time. Now this locking lever has 3 positions. Fully up is fully locked. So at a slight angle is still locked, but it allows adjustment of the lead screw. So I get my thousandths adjustment. And down is fully open to slide. So the first thing I want to do is get the bit in plane with the outfeed table. These are pretty close. 15 thousandths isn't a lot, but if I try and slide my ruler, I run into that bump. So this one table is put out in front like I want it to be. But it's not quite in plane. Okay, there I am, pretty well in plane. I rotate the bit by hand because it's hard to see the widest spot on a spiral bit. Need to go a little bit further. Okay, that's about right. Now when I lock this down, it may or may not stay where it is. It's going to move to the nearest 32nd. So I may have to adjust for the thousandths. I'll find out. Okay. It's now not quite touching. So it shifted a little bit. I wouldn't get the smooth, clean cut that I want. So I'll go into the...
What did you adjust just now?
I just was rotating the bit
Oh, okay.
against the straight edge. I'm just using a little steel straight edge and seeing if they touch.
Yep.
Before I moved the clamp lever, they touched. But when I moved it, it shifted to the nearest 32nd. Now it's no longer going to make exactly the cut I want. So I'm going to go to the partially unlocked position and use my thousandths until I get just the amount of contact that I desire. One might think that I'm going the wrong way. Is that true? No, I think I'm going the right way. There we are. In fact, there I'm a little too much. And what I want to do is have the straight edge be pulled forward by 1/4 of an inch. Not absolutely dead flush. Because of the resilience of wood during the machining, it's better that the knife, the cutter, be just slightly proud. And the easy way to see that is rotating it by hand. It pulls the ruler a small amount, a quarter of an inch, something like that, as I rotate the bit. That means that the cutter is going to be able to reach out there and get a little bit of wood that is in kind of dynamic motion as you're machining. So that's the same for your main router. When you set the outfeed table with your main router, you want it to pull your straight edge slightly as you rotate the knives. It should not just touch and leave it sitting still. Then I'll lock it down, and we should be in position. Okay, I didn't put on my sacrificial fences.
I think I missed that.
Okay.
Are you suggesting that the outfeed fence be just a hair behind?
Mm-hmm. That is precisely it. Thank you. Okay, so if I've got the outfeed fence there and the infeed fence over here, drawing a classical large-scale router with a knife something like that, I want this line to actually let the point be slightly above, such that if I put a straight edge over it here and rotate this by hand, the straight edge will be pulled in this direction, something like 1/4 inch. You'll get better cuts, smoother cuts with that than if you made it dead even. I don't know who figured that out. I learned it at AWA some time ago, back in the 90s probably. But that's an interesting thing, and it has been proved to me time and time again by trying both ways that this way works better. I'm sorry? Skip Hansen. He was the man. All right, so I intended to have the sacrificial fences on there, but I don't think I really need them, so I'll save the time and just work from here. We should be pretty much good to go. So I've got a few pieces that will joint. There's one with a pretty rough edge. Similarly on this edge, we're going to make that smooth. Here's another one with a bit of a rough edge, one with a smoother edge just coming off of the table saw, so it's pretty minor. We can probably get that in one pass. These others will take multiple passes. And then the final thing that I can't do on my main router. I make little things. Every once in a while I realize, oh, I need to joint that. Can you do this safely on your jointer? I sure can. But here I've got a total opening of about 1 inch. If I put these on, I can make it even smaller. So I can safely do something 3 inches long and not have any risk that it'll get grabbed, thrown, pulled out of my hands. So we'll do that as well.
Derek?
Yeah.
So the difference between your two fences is the same as your depth of cut that you were doing in joint?
Right. So the difference, the offset of these two fences is the same as the offset you would get between an in-feed and out-foot table on the main jointer. You probably would never set your jointer as low as 15 thousandths. And this is more jewelry box scale for the kind of things I do. But potentially you can use bigger pieces. You know, this could be a table leg. I wouldn't want to be doing the posts of a 4-poster bed, but I can certainly do things a little bigger than I'm showing you right here. All right, so I'm going to put on my safety equipment, turn off the mic temporarily, and we'll do some joining here. No noise, right? No microphone? Okay. Okay, so I'm not yet used to the delay built into this nice dust collection system that Ben brought in. At any rate, on that last cut, even though it's hard maple, a single pass was enough to get rid of all of the saw marks. And I don't know if you saw any instability there. It felt to me completely smooth, easy, and safe. So I think the jointer option is one of the many that it's worth thinking about for your router table. Ross.
Do you use any lubricant on the table or the fences?
Do I use a lubricant on the table or the fences? Rarely. I have Slip It. Slip It works superbly. It is a compound that you can buy at Woodworker's Supply and other places. That's a wax of some sort. It has no silicone. And I found that when you first apply it, you can see that there's something on your wood. But it lasts several months, and it's only the first few pieces that go across that you can see something. I use paste wax. Tree wax is my primary one. It doesn't show anything even the first time, and it doesn't last quite as long, but it'll last a month anyway for me. And maybe it's just that it's lasting longer than I think, or maybe it's the anodized aluminum isn't particularly high friction. This is oxidized steel plate. I usually don't think about it. I don't have enough friction to bother me in most cases. I do on my main jointer. I always keep that lubricated because it's got more forces and more friction. Alan?
You mentioned the Slip It leaving like a little bit of a coating on what you did. Does that affect the glue joint, any glue joint?
I would think it would. I have not tried to glue off visible Slip It. I have glued after I'm no longer seeing the marks, and those glue joints work fine. So I think it's something about the initial period and it needs to off-gas a little, or maybe I've applied it too thick and it needs to be rubbed off a little. But it's definitely not a problem after the few first pieces. I haven't tried it on the first few. I'll use it when there's something that I'm going to do more machining, and therefore I know that layer will be removed before I get around to gluing.
Eric?
Yes, David.
One with silicone and one without.
Aha, I was not aware of that. So Daryl tells us that there are two different Slip It preparations. One has no silicone and one has some. Ooh. So don't get the one with silicone in your shop. It will make life difficult. Any finish will not go down properly with even the smallest amount of silicone around. And it's really devious. You didn't put silicone on this, but you put silicone on the thing you sanded yesterday, and there was enough in the air that now you try and put finish on today's project, and it does funny skating away from one spot, thick spots and thin spots. So it's really a problem in the shop. All right, I'm going to put these. Yes, no.
Minimum length you could joint like that.
Well, I haven't tried to push it. I'm going to just say off the top of my head 3 inches. Someone could do less, and I wouldn't be amazed, but I don't think I'll try less. Yeah. If it's shorter than 3 inches, I'll maybe just make another one. Rich.
Can your board go for you start losing a good square?
I have gone all the way up to the height of my cutter, which is, I think, a 2-inch cutting height on some of them, and I have not noticed any problem with squareness. So that's the only limiting factor for me is how big a bit do I have. I have longer bits. I begin to get scared at the 2.5-inch bits, so I haven't tried jointing with the longer ones. I've only used the one that, this is solid carbide spiral that goes up to 2 inches.
You have to use your sacrificial pins to the end when you use the 2
Yes, the height opening here, I guess I don't have an easy way to show it, but these two pieces, when they're brought together, the space is 1 inch wide across. So you have to spread them for any bit larger than that. And we'll do that in a little later. And the same thing for the height. The height is, maybe it's more than 1.25 inches in height, I guess. But similar thing. If I need a higher bit setting, I'm going to have to spread these apart. And it takes very well to that. Okay, that's activity number 1. Now I'm going to set this back in line. All I have to do is match up the little pointer with the 0 mark. I don't have to go and carefully get my straight edge, although I'll do it just to prove it to us, but I can very quickly get it back to the neutral position. I don't know.
We're gonna wait a little. We got a late start.
Oops. To adjust the offset, I have to actually loosen 3 different screws. There's one just for the offset, and then 2 for holding the fence in position. So all 3 have to be loosened for this operation. So now I'm set there. Clamp this back down. And I have a straight edge here, precision Lee Valley straight edge I like a lot. And I think that looks like I could just barely see any light from behind it. Can't see any light with no light from the bench, but it looks just as straight as can be. And no easy way to demonstrate that to you, but I would never lie about something like that. So I can run across pretty darn smoothly. You do hear that this has been machined. This is not just an extrusion that they hoped for the best for it to be flat. They mill it afterwards. So you do have a little bit of texture there, but it really is good and flat. Okay, now I need to go back to my sub fences for the next cut because I will be spreading them out. And I'll move that bit, bury it into the fence a little bit. Got them marked with in-feed and out-feed so that there's less likelihood that I will make a mistake. That assumes that I can read and can read at the right moment.
Okay, why did you adjust the upfeed, the offset?
15 thousandths, is that what you mean? Well, so to do the jointing, we had to have this mismatch between in and out so that when we feed in, part gets cut away and then the wood is supported as it comes out. If we had them the same height, then we'd be making gentle curves because it would sort of pivot from one to the other.
Why did you just set it back to 0?
Because I'm no longer going to do jointing.
Oh, gotcha.
So we've done all the jointing I plan to do for today. All the other activities will have a straight inline fence. Sorry, I didn't understand what you were aiming at there initially. So let me look at my notes. I think I'm changing bits here. One other thing I wanted to say. You don't have this Wonder fence. You've got an Incra fence, or you've got a Rockwell fence, or you've got a Craig fence, whatever it is. You want to do some jointing. Well, you don't have the simple adjustment, but you can probably put 2 sub-fences on like this, screw them on in one way or another, T-tracks or wood screws or whatever. Put a shim behind one of them. Cereal box cardboard. It's a pretty good thickness. It runs about 15 or 20 thousandths. So if you just cut yourself a rectangle of cereal box cardboard and drop it behind, clamp everything down, you can do exactly the same thing. Okay, next I want to go to a core box bit, and we'll cut a tiny raised panel. So here's my core box bit. It's basically straight sides and then a rounded nose. And I'll switch out from this straight bit. The proper wrenches. No company supplies you with the proper wrenches. Mike Sherrard turned me on to this. It is so much better. $4 at the flea market, one stand, $5 at the stand a little down the way. So for $9, I have these long wrenches. Now with basically fingertip kind of movement, I can get more pressure than on those vicious little short-handled wrenches that came with the router.
You can also buy those at the tractor store in Bernal Neal.
Yeah, a lot of people have them. Most don't have them as cheap as the flea market, but whatever you're willing to pay, I highly recommend it. and they sit on top of each other properly. You have those skinny little flat ones, and you can never match the two nuts, but these are pretty darn reliable.
Are they inch and an eighth?
Inch and an eighth.
Is that a Porter cable?
This is a Porter cable router. They're big 7518, which I like a lot. It's a big dumb router that does what it does very well. No, this is a fixed base model. I have a router lift, but it's not portable. Oh, and I make my own little Baltic birch ply inserts. They're nice because you can work them with woodworking tools, but there are better things available. If you want to pay somebody to make them for you, they can make them better than I can make them, but these work well enough for me. So I need to go to a larger diameter hole for this larger diameter bit.
How do you cut those down?
I have purchased a Harbor Freight fly cutter. So it goes in a drill press and has an arm and a tooth. And I just spent an hour getting it set up exactly right. And that's only used for that. It sits in the drawer, waiting for when I need to make more. Run it on low speed, and it will drill a 1/4-inch center hole and cut the proper outside edge for this particular insert. And this is steel. I like steel because it's magnetic. It's hard to get them. Lee Valley makes a beautiful one that's even bigger that I often think about. Am I ready to spend another $200? I probably am. One of these days, I'm going to get the big steel Lee Valley one. But most of them are aluminum, and aluminum's fine, but you'll see in a minute why I like magnetic. I use magnetic fixtures, and it's nice to have it on the router.
Normally he would have Vanna White come out and do this, but Don refused to do it.
You want to share any with where the depth of setting it in this collet?
I don't know if I have wisdom, but Dave asked about how deep I set the bit in the collet. Generally, as deep as it'll go minus a 1/16. I think every bit of that contact surface area is worth having and using. Some bits have really short shanks. Others, most of them are more moderate, and usually you can get enough in there. In this particular setup, I've only got a 1/4-inch thick steel plate. There's not a lot in the way. I can bring my router up. Again, you can't really see this very well, but I can raise this and actually get the whole nut above the surface. So I don't need to worry about sticking it out in order to reach high enough. With this particular configuration, I can always get the bit in as deep as the collet will take, minus a 1/16. The minus a 1/16 is because as you clamp down that last bit of tightening, the shank actually goes deeper into the router. So if you have put it all the way into the bottom, you may not get as good a grasp as you would like because it's fighting against the forces. So give yourself a little tiny space there. There are router tables or mounting systems that don't let you get up as high as you need. You see them less often these days than 20 years ago, but be aware of that. Question?
What happens is in the routers is the collet that's there, once you screw that nut on, it sucks the collet down in. So if you have your bit already bottomed out, it won't tighten and you'll leave it loose.
Exactly. So you don't get this good grab on the bit if you go too far. Anything else you think I should mention, David? Okay, so we're going to make a simple-minded raised panel here. I'm going to start by finding my 0 position. Well, I guess I'll start by tightening my half fences here. Get them right position. They don't need to be super close in most cases. If you have got a very exotic wood that you're making this raised panel out of, that is very eager to have grain tear out, then you have the option of making a truly zero clearance in-feed area just by starting the router and sliding the MDF until it's cut by the bit. Then there is no space and you get maximum support for your grain. But in most cases, I haven't found that necessary. Most woods that I've used for this kind of raised panel stuff, which I don't do a lot, I like square edge more than the curve that we're going to make here. But anyway, I haven't had a problem with severe tear out.
Would you just slide just that one fence in, leave the other one fixed?
Yeah, the outfeed doesn't matter because there's no cutting going on there.
Oh, okay.
So it's only the infeed where the cutter is coming in here and trying to pull the grain out of your workpiece.
Okay.
And if you can support that grain really right up to the plane of the subfence, it will help with tear out.
Close that.
Yeah, so this would be as small as possible if your grain's giving you trouble, including cutting into the MDF. Jim?
Try to slide the
If you
outfeed.
push them all together, you won't get good dust removal.
Well, yeah, having a little bit of room for airflow, it can help, but there is space between them there and a little coming up from the bottom. In general, the airflow, I mean, the dust removal has been very impressive. This hollow tube system, it's really worked well. So that could be a concern, but I haven't found it to be very significant.
Derek, with that in the fence, do you feel that you don't need under table vacuum?
That's correct. Under table vacuum can be valuable. Incra makes a box that goes underneath and encloses everything. I tried it with my own homemade box, and I was not getting more than a teaspoon of dust after an hour or so of working.
With that fence?
With this fence.
Yeah.
So the hole in the plate, I want to be pretty close to the diameter of the bit. It just doesn't seem like there's that much dust going that direction with this setup. You know, the airflow, the spinning of the bit creates its own airflow and is throwing dust horizontally. This is sucking horizontally. It all seems to work quite well.
And the motor is venting from, in this case, the bottom to the top or up toward the blade. Is that correct?
I believe so. Yeah, I think it sucks in around the cap and the switch and blows towards the bit. So that's going to disperse the dust at a minimum and maybe get some of it to stay up above the table surface. Rich?
I find that underneath dust collection really kicks in when you're trying to do a dado or a groove, something in which you effectively cut off the dust collection from the fence. Then it's dramatic.
Mm-hmm.
But it pulls down.
What was that comment?
So the comment is, what if you don't have the bit in the fence, in the slot? What if you're doing a groove in the middle of the board and the fence is way back here? Yeah, then that's a very different situation. And downward dust collection can be effective. It can also cut down noise some, which can be handy. I'm always going to be wearing my hearing protection, but everything's still noisy, so cutting down noise a little bit certainly is a fine thing. Okay, I need to adjust this to have approximately in plane.
No, I was going to tell you, we're going to need to take breaks. So before you actually start it, we'll send them off suspense.
Okay, very good. So I'm going to try and find a 0 point. I don't have to be as precise as I did on the jointer, but just when is the bit in the plane of the fence? Okay, right about there. So I'll clamp that down to remind myself that this is no cut. This is with the bit completely buried in the fence. I'm going to reference from that. I usually slide my scale before I start each action. I usually put the 10-inch mark under the hairline cursor. They say in some of the instructions, put 0. Well, 0 is way over here with my setup. 10 is an easy number to remember. It's right in the middle. I can go above or below it easily. But I set it so that I can remind myself, where did I start? What was the starting cut? So that's got me ready to now adjust it for my first cut. And I guess it's time for the break.
Hey, Chris, when you lock it down, does it lock the scale, the sliding part, the sliding scale marker?
Well, all of these are locked in. This is held by magnets.
Okay.
it doesn't move unless I move it, but it's easy to move when I want to move it. These are held by friction. They're put into a gentle curve. They also move just by sliding with finger pressure. But they don't move unless someone pushes on them. Okay, so even though this core box bit is a pretty simple cutter, it makes quite a reasonable, attractive, simple raised band. So don't think you have to go with super complex profiles to get a look that you might like. We'll cut another one of these in this piece of wood here. Cut the cross grain first, and then the long grain. That gets rid of most of the tear out. Now you still might get a little tear out on the edges. If you feel that's really important, follow it up, feed it through with a push block of the same width, and that will cut out all of your tear out on the edge. But on the other hand, this is going into the slot, into a frame. So all of that tear out is probably going to be covered up and be invisible. So you may not need to worry about it, but if you do, there's an easy answer of just push it through. All right, I set up 0 fence. The cutter just is right in the plane of the sacrificial fences. We did that before the break. Let's make sure things are tightened down. That's good. Okay. So I'm going to pull back 1/8 of an inch. That's going to be my first cut. And I'm just using the number scale here. I'm going from 10, which I always set up as my easy to remember starting point, to 10 1/8. And we'll do all 4 edges. And then we'll show it to you and then go in and look at the a little bit deeper. So mute. Okay, microphone back on. And the vacuum cleaner shuts down. So we did pretty well. I got a little irregularity with my feed. So it's a good thing I want to go a little deeper. I was not moving my hands exactly as I needed to. But we're actually doing pretty well. There's virtually no fuzzing, even here in the cross grain part. I find often there is a little bit of fuzz right at that joint. And a sanding block will take care of it in just seconds. You just put it completely flat and you can get that fuzz off really quickly. So let's go another 16th and then another 16th, and then I'll stop the router again and we'll call that done. Funny you should mention it. Although I was planning to introduce it later, Daryl is suggesting that mag switch featherboards might be handy in a situation like this. I don't use the featherboards that much on my router table because I often go forward and back, and they only want you to go one way. But many operations, it's worth hitting both ends more than once. So I made this mag switch just straight edge, and I could indeed have used it to help give myself a more consistent and accurate path of travel. So now it's held with a fence on each side, and it helps make sure that it's guided really well. And I think it's a really handy accessory, and we'll see it again in a few minutes.
Where'd you buy those?
These came from Woodworker's Supply. They're just, and I learned about them. I mean, I'd seen them, but I didn't appreciate them until Mike Murray showed them at one of the AWA meetings, and he said they were great. I think so. Yeah, so they should be on sale every month as a special deal, as one safety item. So I just cut the holes for them, planed the wood the right thickness, and now I can have a straight edge on anything that's magnetic. So as I talked before, I love the steel for the reason of magnetic accessories. All right, other questions? Okay. So next, I think I'll just talk about, and not actually do in the interest of time, an even more zero clearance approach when you're trying to use a slot cutter, for example. Tear out can be a significant problem with a winged slot cutter of this sort because it's really trying to pull the grain out of your workpiece with each one of those teeth as it comes around. So you have an answer to that. If you wish, you can start with 1/4 inch MDF, melamine coated. Could be thicker, could be 1/2 inch. It will fit in the same T-slot as we have on these bigger ones, and it's got no opening at all. None of this gap situation. So then I can actually cut through the melamine with the cutter in its final position. I put it into place, lock it down, open that clamp, start the router, and push it back and let the cutter come through. And then you're really at zero clearance. I would, in fact, push it back with a block covering that cutter, because otherwise you'll get some chip out from the melamine. But with this, you get as though it were manufactured to exactly that bit. You get just the perfect fit, and that will reduce your tear out quite a bit on using bits that tend towards tear out. David?
And you can get that at Rugby.
Yes, Rugby is now stocking 1/4 inch MDF with melamine coating. So it's a real nice jig and fixture material. For a while, you could only get particle board. And well, you can get masonite, but yeah. And I think this is a nicer material for many of the jigs that I use. So they're pretty inexpensive. You do, probably.
Of course.
That's what friends are for. Get someone else to buy it and go over to their shop and get the second half of it.
Can other thicknesses too?
I'm sorry?
Can you get other thicknesses? No. Just 1/4 inch, not a Rugby.
So you can also do this if you don't have a fancy fence like this with T-tracks and that sort of thing. What might you do? Well, what I did for years before I got the Wonder Fence was this. It's an auxiliary fence. It gives me space for the bit. A big bit like a winged cutter now has room to spin without chewing up my aluminum fence. I can redo the insert relatively easily. And it needs these steps because you're probably going to clamp it on. Maybe you're screwing it on, but I usually clamped mine on. So I needed enough room that the high part of that clamp will not interfere with the travel of my workpiece. So there's an option, half an hour of work, and you can get a nice zero clearance fence for pieces or situations that need that. Questions on that? Rich?
Would there be a reason not to use like hardboard instead of the quarter-inch melamine? Why would you choose?
So hardboard in the sense of masonite kind of stuff?
Yeah, that's smooth on one side.
It works okay. I've tried it. It fuzzes more severely when it's cut through unsupported. So if, for example, I push this back into the cutter without a block to hold it, not only would it have stuff sticking out, but that is stiff enough to actually deviate the path of your wood. It doesn't just fold back flat. So it's okay. You need to be aware of that. You need to file or sand it off if you do get those things. Every time you drill through it with a regular drill bit, there's going to be something that sticks out enough that it interferes with a completely smooth travel. So if you deal with that, I think hardboard's fine. Okay.
Do you just clamp your piece of wood that keeps it from moving then?
Yeah, I have a clamp, one at each end. Oh.
The thing you're putting the slot in.
So, like this piece of wood?
No, suppose you've got a piece of wood you want to put the slot in.
Oh, yeah, then I would just run that across the cutter with a push block normally.
Okay, and that's what holds the piece from moving this way?
No, that piece, the thin piece, the piece that is making it a zero clearance fence, it's got to be clamped on, screwed on, held on in some absolutely fixed way. And then the workpiece moves across the face of it and across the bit.
Oh,
yeah. Right. Now, of course, other cutters, you might want to do zero clearance in that similar way, but slot is the one that I've seen the most problem with tear out. Okay, let's do a bullnose edge. And so I need the bullnose folder. Price and Waterhouse have delivered these. So I'm changing to a bullnose bit. This is an interesting kind of edge cut because it removes 100% or 99% of the edge wood. You're not leaving really anything except the very crown of that curve of the original plane. So a careful adjustment matters.
Derek, have you ever used one of those big drop leaf table bits?
No.
Suckers are about 3 inches long or something like that.
Never have. And they scare me a little bit.
Derek, I thought the spacing between the bottom of your bit and your collet was to reduce heat transfer. Am I making that up?
I've never heard that before. It doesn't make a lot of sense to me. There's a whole lot of metal around it. Okay, so we're in the ballpark. There's my
Eric, if you make a set of height setting blocks,
I'm sorry, I didn't hear.
height setting blocks where you can just take the block up to the bit and then set it right there. You set up a bunch of those.
Yeah, Bill is asking, have I made setup blocks that have a number of specific heights so that you can quickly get to a chosen height? And I do. I have a set of those, not for everything, but they're very handy. We'll see. Well, we probably won't get to it today, given the way the time is flowing. But for dovetails in particular, and for lock miter bits and some other things, having a setup block can save you a whole lot of time. So I need to make sure that I've got clearance. Let's see, am I going to be able to, I think I'm going to need to open up this space of the aluminum. because there are internal parts that might impinge on the arc, and I have found out that that's not a good thing. So we'll put the sacrificial ones aside for the moment. Yeah, it's a good thing, probably, that this carbide bit cuts aluminum, because otherwise I probably would have exploded a few bits or something.
Might be cheaper than wrecking the fence.
Well, it usually doesn't wreck it. It does. It is an embarrassment, a lasting embarrassment, but the parts still work, in my experience. You can find rounded corners on a number of things that didn't originally have them. Okay, so I spin the bit out here, but I also want to make sure it still spins freely when I go all the way back behind the fence. So that's how far back I'm going to be. Okay, I'm good with that. So again, I want to start knowing where 0 is. No, don't need it in this case. I could have put it back on, but that is one issue, that if the sacrificial fence prevents adjustment of the aluminum fence. So if you don't plan ahead, you'll put it on and take it off more than once, or if you don't need it at all, as in this case, I will just go with it aluminum only. And many operations work fine with aluminum only. Now, I am having trouble moving. Why am I having trouble moving? Just heavy and stiff, I guess, or I'm heavy and stiff. Okay, so there's our 0 point. I'll set my scale to 10, as I always do. Clamp it down for the moment. And what did I tell myself? About an 1/8 inch first cut is what I recommended to myself.
Their fragility clamped down the router bit.
With the wrenches?
No, with the height.
Adjustment.
Yes, yes, I set the height and I tightened this, but thank you for checking.
Same question.
Okay, so we should be good. These are the Incra push blocks. They're pretty good. There are lots of bad push blocks. There are lots of indifferent push blocks. There are a few good ones, and I'm pretty happy with the Incra ones. They include the option of a plastic shield, a transparent one, so that you can sort of see what's going on and deflect chips. I use those sometimes, but usually the chips aren't going in the direction where that's important. But they've got just about the right resiliency, and this guard here I kind of like. I'm hoping that I'm not getting my fingers into the cutter, but those pointy little splinters that are sometimes fired at your hand, they're deflected by this to a certain extent. So I'm pretty happy. Okay, time to mute the mic. So we now have a very small flat spot, just where we want to be for the final adjustment. So I will go from here, not by the 30seconds of an inch, but by the thousandths wheel. I will move into the intermediate locked position, dial in 5 thousandths, make a cut, see how it is. Dial in some more if I need it, and I should be able to come up to just that perfect arc without getting rid of wood that I wanted to keep. If this were a setup piece, and most operations on a router require some setup pieces, I'd put a pencil line there and see when I trimmed away that pencil line. Now that setting is a little fiddly the first time on the setup block. Once you've got it, you don't have to redo it. It's right. I can go back to 0 position, work up all the way, go exactly to the number on my main scale, and it'll have the added 22 thousandths or 14 thousandths or whatever it is. It'll stay there until I re-zero it. So it's not like you have to do a lot of this fine-tuning. One time is enough then you can run 50 or 10, 100 pieces, however many you need. So I'll do that dialing in, and then we'll move on to something else. So we ended up about 15 thousandths from the 32nd of an inch. I added another 15 thousandths a cut. Now I've got a perfect arc. Now I can leave that set and run as many as I want and come up to this every time, even moving stepwise towards it. And this is an area where a bit like this causes a lot of burning on certain woods, particularly cherry, harder woods with some oil content. So being able to take that last cut a 32nd at a time will trim off all of the burning that might have come from a heavier cut earlier and is light enough that you won't generate the heat to produce new burning.
So it's
Rich.
finished ready is what you're saying, right?
I think so. This does not even seem to me like it needs sanding. That would depend on your wood, how sharp your cutter is, but I'd say that's pretty much finished ready. Go ahead and pass it around.
So it was supported on both sides.
Yes, I had contact right at the top of the crown with both in-feed and out-feed, and to some extent, even if I overcut, I might see that, but not right away. As I pass the cutter, if I've cut too deep, I'll see a gap, and then at some point it'll sort of pivot over and the cut will get deeper. So I was watching for that, and I didn't get it. I got a nice, smooth, continuous line on both in-feed and out-feed. Well, I'm going to go to then the mortise and tenon, and we'll stop with that. And it may take me 20 minutes. Maybe I can do it in 15. We'll see.
Derek?
Yes?
The longer you go, the shorter our board is.
Ha-ha. Okay, so we've got certain conflicting pressures here.
Are you going to change bits?
I'm going to change bits.
Okay, David, why don't you step up and just explain? David brought a wonderful piece that he built, and I thought it was certainly worthy of a show and tell and show you how he accomplished it. He makes it look easy, but you can talk to him later if you want to.
It's a serving tray, dinner tray, whatever. This is a bent lamination. It is not steam bent. So to achieve this, you start with a piece of stock, you mark it so you can keep the pieces in order. That's the critical part. I've taken to marking it on the end as opposed to on the top. So somebody's going to ask, I use a wood slicer brand bandsaw blade from Highland Hardware. It has a very thin curve. I can get, this is 8 pieces of 1/16, and I can get this out of like a 5/4 piece of stock. So it's about 50% waste, but that's, I don't know, I'm pretty pleased with that. The bending jig, not surprisingly, has one curve up, one curve down. It took me till I made the jig the second time to realize I wanted a spacer between the up and the down parts of the jig so that when the wood spread, it didn't rub against the faces of the jig. The first couple of times I did it, I used a half a dozen pipe clamps. I got sick and tired of that, and for $150 I went to Horror Free and bought a 20-ton hydraulic press. You just put it in the press and you clamp it down. Microphone? I don't know, do I? Do you want me to have the microphone?
I think that's a good idea.
It's easy. That's all you need to know. Then I've got some jigs to hold the wood so I can bandsaw it after it's been laminated. And then, of course, the standard sliding miter jig to cut the corners. There's no spline in here. It's just a well-cut miter and Titebond glue. A slotting bit, which we've just discussed, to cut the slot in the frame. And then it's just glued together with a band clamp. A wash coat of shellac, and I've rediscovered my spray gun, and this is sprayed with water-based poly. And that's all.
What kind of glue did you use between the laminates?
Just Titebond and a roller. Just spread it on, roll it, keep it kind of thin. Otherwise, there's a lot of glue that could be squeezed out if you overdo it.
So do you have to squeeze it every laminate?
No, you stack all 8 pieces together, put it in the form, and that's why you need a 20-ton press to squeeze it.
The details on the bandsaw blade again?
It's a Highland Hardware wood slicer. It's
Half-inch.
oh, sorry, ½ inch. I thought you were asking thickness, and it's like you really expect me to know that. No, it's a ½ inch blade. It's a variable tooth design, which they claim reduces vibration, but the most important part is it's just a really thin blade. And having learned from the Michael Fortune workshop, if you set your bandsaw upright, and it mainly has to do really with the location of the blade on the wheel, you can get 0 drift consistently. All these things about adjusting your fence to the drift is nonsense.
Thank you. My pleasure. Thank you very much for that.
All right, so we're going to cut a small mortise and then match a tenon to it. The router table is good for smallish things, mortises. This could be for a table. Table leg is not outrageous. But there's a point where it gets too big for me to want to cut the mortise on the router table, and I'll go to a handheld router with some mortising jig. But there's lots of times when I really like using the router table. It gives a lot of control. I think I'll degrease the gap here a little bit.
Is that a straight bit?
Yes, this is a 1/4 inch straight bit. It's a 1/2 inch shank. Relatively hard to find. Solid carbide, 1/4 inch cutter on a 1/2 inch shank. So it's much stiffer and beefier in the main body of it than the full 1/4 inch with 1/4 inch shank.
It's a spiral bit.
This is an Amana.
Is it a spiral bit?
It is a spiral bit, spiral solid carbide.
Where'd you get that hex leg?
This came with the Incra system in the box, except it had a black plastic handle at that time. Now it has a hand-turned maple handle. No need to do that, but what the heck? If you got a lathe, you got some maple, got some time. I like that sort of thing.
Retirement sounds rough.
All right, I'm going to zero back on my thousandth scale, just so I have an easy point to count from next time I need to move it. Ross?
Just a comment on bits. I can't speak for the quality, but MLCS, company you get online, has less expensive bits in a wide variety. I did buy a half-inch shank and a quarter-inch, not polycarbonate, carbide tip bit from that company.
I've used MLCS. Ross is recommending MLCS. They have a wide variety of bits at pretty good prices. I bought from them a lot until Dave Strip told me about AliExpress, which is the Chinese companies that make the stuff that MLCS sells, marketing direct to you. And they have astounding prices. ALI and then Express. So Ali like Alibaba, Express. And they sell anything made in China you can probably find on that website. Yeah, it's just insane. Halloween masks and just everything. So yeah, I have not bought many things, but I bought a lot of a handful of good router bits from them. So AliExpress.com, if you wish.
Is that
ALI.
Is that a semicolon?
No, that's ALI.
Oh, okay. Not case sensitive.
Yeah, and there's no space there. I just wrote it for the space by mistake. Okay, so we looked it up. Dave found a set of 3 drawer corner making bits for $80 at MLCS. Nice bits, nice set, everything good about it. We found the same 3 on AliExpress for $6, $9, and $10. So a total of under 20 instead of a total of 80. On the other hand, they can mail a router bit from China. Well, shipping is frequently free, or if you're paying for it, it's like 30 cents or 50 cents or 80 cents for shipping. All of that is going to disappear because of the trade war that has been initiated by our current government. And about a year from now, you may not have an AliExpress option in this country anymore. We'll see what happens.
Prices are going up.
Yeah. Rich told me that he bought this wonderful combination joiner planer, and 2 weeks later it was $700 more.
It went an average of $700 to $900.
Price increased $700 to $900 because of the trade war. So,
And just one caution about buying from AliExpress. You're familiar with the term slow boat from China. You do not buy bits when you need them.
Yeah. 6-week delivery time, they consider totally normal. Why would you write us about that? It's on the way, don't worry. But on the other hand, the things that I have gotten have been in good quality. The things that I have not gotten, they have sent a new one immediately. So I don't feel that I've been cheated, but I have had to be patient.
But what does that mean you don't get them if it takes 6 weeks?
Well, if you don't get them and you think it's too long and they accept that it's too long, then they'll send you a new one, and sometimes you get 2. And I write them and say, I got a second one, sorry. And they say, just keep it, don't worry. It was $3 for retail, so I can see why they don't worry too much about it.
The flip side is MLCS ships by first-class mail for free. So when you want it, like in the next couple of days.
What do you make it? MSCS?
MLCS.
They're the kind of competitors.
Derek, I also think that another company is American Eagle. I believe those 2 have now merged.
Yes, American Eagle and MLCS have merged. They keep the designations. American Eagle stuff is made in America. MLCS is made wherever they found a good deal on it. Frequently China, maybe Italy, maybe Israel, maybe South Africa. So you never know. I mean, sometimes it's marked on the ad, and sometimes it's marked on the bit when you get it.
You might want to talk about up spiral versus down, and that it's relative to a handheld router.
Indeed, when you see a spiral bit marked up spiral, that assumes it's in a handheld router and you're looking down towards the bit. So if the dust is being pulled out of the mortise towards you, that's an up spiral bit. If it's being pushed down into the mortise or whatever, that's a down spiral. There are advantages to each, many more upcut bits on the market than down, but both of them are there and readily available, and you can pick the one that works for your situation. I use mostly upcuts. In theory, you put a little more risk of tear out at the top edge of your mortise, but it's small enough that I have not been worried about it. Okay?
Plus that's hidden.
I'm sorry?
When you put the mortise and tenon together, the tear out is hidden.
Tends to be pretty well hidden, yes.
Did you say that intended to be used in a handheld router?
It's not so much it's intended, but it's named from that point of view.
Oh, okay.
So when I flip the router upside down in the router table, I don't change from calling it an upcut bit to a downcut bit. I always name it from the way the helix is going and the way it'll draw the chips when viewed in a handheld router.
Oh, so this is an upcut bit that's drawing it down out of the table.
Indeed, that is correct. In this situation, on a router table, what's named an upcut will pull the chips down through the table towards the router. Okay, so I've zeroed. I'm going to offset 5/8 of an inch. Oh, I've zeroed and not reset my scale to 10. Let's make sure. Yeah. So I didn't do that step that I always try and do. Now I've done that. So I'm going to give myself 5/8. That's going to be the offset that I want this mortise to be from the edge. Here is my workpiece. You can imagine that this might be a table leg. It would be longer. And we're going to put a mortise and tenon for an apron. Let's see if I can find my apron piece. Yes. So here is my apron that will be mortised and tenoned in there. I pre-trimmed this. I like to cut my shoulders on a table saw. I find it fast and accurate and clean. Sometimes I cut them on the router, but you don't get quite as clean a cut on the router. So I frequently do the shoulder cut with the table saw and then move to the router to finish. And that's what we've done here. Now, how do I get the right positioning here? I've got the top and bottom of my mortise laid out on my wood. How do I transfer that to setting up my stops? I'm going to draw a line. I'm going to use just the body of this square and run it up against one edge of the bit and draw a line on my router table. It would help if I put the lead out.
Can you move your hand? Is that possible?
I'll do it. It'll show on the second side. So then I'll come over, flip the square over, come up to the second position, and draw another line. So now I've got two parallel lines, 1/4 inch apart, exactly squared off from that router bit. Now I'll move the bit underneath so it doesn't interfere, and move my layout line to line up with one of those edges and put my stop. Then I'll move to the other position, the other layout line, another squared edge of the bit.
How do you see it now? You just covered it up.
No.
Just poking out the other end. Got it.
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to see from your position or the camera's position, but my lines on my workpiece are visible. My lines drawn on the router table are visible. So it's pretty easy to make that position.
What's the front end of the blue stop block?
Incra. All of this is Incra. It's different ages, different vintages. This one is from the mid-90s, and this one is a currently available version. And it's very nice. The new ones, they've come up with some cute additional features. So I really like them. But these are still useful. Okay, now we're going to lower the piece to be mortised onto a spinning bit. That is potentially safe. If something is potentially safe, it is potentially dangerous. So we need to think about what we're doing. The stops are an essential part of the safety. I would never try to lower onto a bit, spinning bit, without a stop to back me up. I'm going to use my magnetic mag jig auxiliary fence so that now there's nowhere left and right for this to go. It's going to stay in plane. So I can lower it down. It's not going to twist out of line. Ross?
Comment, just be sure that you remember which marks go where. Because if you get stopped in the wrong position, ask me how I know.
Okay. So you're making sure which marks go where in terms of...
Where the bit's going to be cutting in relation to the marks because you can't see where the bit's...
That's true. Which end you mark to which one?
Yes, you do have to... They're pairs, and they're not interchangeable pairs. So, yeah.
If you're doing a table leg, it's going to be longer. You're not going to be able to put a stop on the other end.
Indeed. So depending on how long it is, there is an auxiliary slide stop that Incra makes for dealing with just this situation, and they make them up to very long. I own one that's maybe 36 inches long, so that takes care of any tables that I've done. But I've also made my own, just a scrap of wood to set the block in the right place. But it's certainly true. Then I don't have the fancy Incra 1/32 stuff. I've just got a thing out there that I adjust to place and tighten a thumb screw. That works pretty darn well, and this is not the super critical kind of measurement. Rich?
What also helps if you don't have a long enough thing is to use the edge of your table and just raise the bit just a hair so that you score it. And that way when you raise the bit, it will safely get in there and you can move it over without having to use that stop block.
So I think I'm following you, but I don't feel safe enough. I'm not saying it's a bad idea. I don't think it's sufficient. So Rich is saying a scoring cut would help prevent the bit from overrunning, and therefore you might not need one of the stop blocks. I don't feel confident with that.
Well, because I'm pivoting off the edge of the table.
Indeed. But the power of a 3 horsepower nominal router, when it wants to self-feed, it is stronger than I am. And so I really want this here. I'm not saying you shouldn't do it or that it isn't safe for some people. I don't feel safe with it. Okay, I'm not terribly happy with this. This is a big enough piece. I might do it. But what I will do instead is put a handle on it. This is double stick tape. And you can put a handle on any piece you want to lower into a bit and improve your control and safety by a noticeable amount.
Speed tape.
Double-sided, double stick tape, whatever name you want to give it. I use 2 kinds. I use the cloth type, which this is, and I use the paper type. I've had great luck with good quality versions of both of those. I've never found a plastic-based one that I liked at all, but there may be one. I've certainly used bad tapes of all types, but it's pretty easy to get good tapes too, and I'm glad of it. Now, time is a factor and pressure is a factor. So just because you stick it on doesn't mean it has the same strength as if you stick it on and give it 30 seconds in a clamp. So I try to give it a little time.
And what is your preference again?
I'm using cloth in this case because I have 1-inch wide cloth and I have 1/2-inch wide paper. Both of them I like. So
Cloth is from woodworkers?
it was from Woodcraft when we had a Woodcraft store here. I don't know if Woodworkers has a kind that I would like in cloth right now or not. I have bought stuff that I didn't like from Woodworkers and stuff that I did. You know, they change their products and it's sometimes hard to keep track.
How about glue too? I mean, if modulo finishing issues.
Yeah, so Dave is suggesting we could glue on a handle with hot melt glue. Certainly reasonable. Okay, I'm going to now move this back into its position. 10 5/8. Looks like it's in the right place, but this is not in the right place anymore. I'd forgotten that I hadn't adjusted my fence at that moment. So I'll note where my stop is. There's a scale along the top here. So to get it back in exactly the same place, all I have to do is put it in the same 32/32 of an inch. I'll put a little pencil line there so I don't have to read fine scale accurately twice. Move this over a little bit. Get my mag jig set. Bring the stop back in position. Okay, I think I'm ready. Turn off the mic. So we got a pretty good mortise. Not that deep, so this is not entirely a real-world situation, but we've got a nice clean ends and proper offset, I believe, from my edge. We're probably not doing it all well on time. Oh, 1208, that's not terrible. So let's try and do quickly the tenon.
So what was the depth of cut?
11 millimeters. And my tenon is going to be 10 millimeters. So I've got to change my height a little bit. I want a little space at the bottom of my mortise so that there's room for glue to go. And this is kind of a critical adjustment, so if I were really making something, I would use some test blocks. But in this case, we don't have to get the product out the door. So our zero position was 10. And then, let's see, where's my notes here? Is there a piece of paper on the floor there somewhere? Curious. Oh, there we are. So I decided that I would go to 10 3/16 for this trimming cut to size the tenon. It's currently much too big to go into the slot. Now I'm going to trim on both sides. This means I'm referencing off two different surfaces. That is not optimum. Any error somewhere will be transferred to the tenon. So I frequently don't do that. I will reference off on only one side. I will cut one face that way and then move it back so that the workpiece is pinched between the saw and the cutter and come back this way, because otherwise it would be a climb cut, self-feeding. If I tried to go this way, it would go this way and hit the back wall. So that's one option, which I use frequently. I would use my magnetic fence, which I just lost, but I can reclaim. But I also sometimes, if I know I've milled carefully, I will reference off of opposite faces and can generally make it work. So that's an option to be considered.
Well, you centered it.
Indeed, but you may get piece A that's a little thicker than piece B, and therefore the tenon sizes will be different. Whereas if you reference always from the same side, then you can really make the tenon sizes identical. Okay, I think I'm ready to do some cuts here.
Now I've forgotten which end I cut. Doesn't really matter, I suppose. Yeah, it's this one. Tight. Go in, too tight. So now we have the thousandths adjustment. 2000s? Let's go 2000s. Going the right way? This way, right? 2000s, trim on each side, that will give us 4 thousandths less.
Moment of truth. Did we dial it in correctly? Nice, tight, hanging up for some reason I don't understand, but the fit is good.
When is it good enough?
I think you have about 5 thousandths to play with for a good mortise and tenon joint. The smallest to the biggest is a difference of about 5 thousandths, or plus or minus 2.5.
See if it'll fall out, right?
Oh, it will. I've got a step in there that I created when I was raising or lowering. So I've got a different size deep than I do shallow. But if I push a little bit, it goes in. So not a perfect cut on the mortise, pretty good cut on the tenon. And yeah, so the question about how much can you go, plus and minus 2.5 thousandths is where I think it is for the maximum strength joint. Goes together properly, doesn't jam as the glue is setting up while you push it together, but isn't so sloppy that the glue is not performing at full strength. People get away with more. If it's too big, use epoxy.
For everyday routing, still use Incra?
100%. There's never been another fence on my router table, and I find it hard to work. When I visit someone else's shop, I go to a toy party, we have a person who rents part of the shop, and I use his table. It's really hard to do stuff. because I can't figure out how to get things in the right place and accurately adjusted. So it's always there, and I'm very happy with it. So I think we'll stop there, except for questions.
Explain previously, what does this jig cost?
So up to here without the Wonder Fence, $325. Another $250 for the Wonder Fence, so you're at $540, something like that. $590 maybe it is, for the whole setup. So pricey. I wouldn't have bought it the first day. I bought the $29 one when it first came out. But having grown with it, I would never be without it. Steve?
Well, just sort of following on those two questions, I was curious about, sort of what tipped the scales for you in deciding to go this direction. Was it the volume of work that you do, or is it the ease of use of this system, or some combination of the two? Or?
Well, yes, thank you. Question is, why did I end up going this way? What tipped me over? What tipped me over was what I do least now, these fancy joints. I was real excited by them, and I thought I would really love to do that, and I started doing them, and I still do them. And I like them, but they're 1% of my activity. I didn't realize at that time that this would be 100% of my activities would be done with this positioner. And it does everything I want, including this. So I was sucked in by the fanciness, but I continued to grow with the system and buy the newer, better models because it's just so useful for every single thing I do. Peter?
Do you use the system on your table saw?
We have that set up for the table saw, but I don't. We have a partner in the shop and he doesn't like it, so I don't have it on the table saw all that often. But I think that it's a great fence for the table saw as well.
This is a question about what you didn't get to.
Uh-huh.
But a general question about this device versus a fancy dovetail jig for doing dovetails. Is that too big a question for?
No, I think we can cover that. So what's the difference between this and a big fancy jig? The biggest, most fancy one that I know of is the Porter Cable Omni Jig. It's been around for 50 or more years. It costs about the same, somewhere between $500 and $600 last I looked, maybe more now. It will do a set of choices. It's got 20 bits and 20 templates, maybe more. So it gives you a lot of choices. This one comes with 51 templates. According to the router people, you can make several billion different kinds of dovetail joints with it. Now, you don't need several billion. You don't even want to think about several billion. But on the other hand, you got a scale like this. It's got over 1,000 markings on it. How often are you going to use all those markings? Why don't you just get a ruler with 3 markings? Well, we need the one we need. We need the ability to do whatever specific thing it is and ignore all the others. And that's what the Incra template system gives to me. I wanted to make this half-inch joint look better. It's going to have to be for another workshop, but I talked about how much I hate the 14-degree half-inch dovetail that everyone sells. Well, I found I could use a Lee brand metric dovetail bit. I could get 2 different spacings, 2 different depths that worked beautifully with half-inch or a little under half-inch stock. And I needed spacing of 23 30 seconds and 13 30 seconds. Well, those are hard things to count on your scale here. There's already an Incra template, comes with it to everyone that has that. They didn't make it for me, they didn't make it for the Lee Jig, but they made it, and I can use it. Now, Dave Strip has found a free software that will do the dovetail calculations for you for any bit, for any spacing, for any thickness, and we'll get that on the website. He's also prepared an Excel spreadsheet that does some similar calculations about bit height. So we'll try and get those on the website too. But the advantage of this over the Porter Cable Omni Jig is anything you can think of, you can do it or come close enough to it that it's good enough. David?
The flip side of it is, I would contend, and Derek will comment, if you're doing a ton of drawers and you can live with what the Lee or Porter Cable Omni Jig gives you, you'll have a lot more throughput on those jigs, just because they're simpler. Once set up, they're simpler to use or faster to use.
Absolutely. So David's saying that If all you need to do is a bunch of drawers or a bunch of the same thing, and you can accept the limitations of that jig, one of the painful ones is your stock width is limited in fairly strict ways. Maybe the next one over is an inch. You could be 4 inches wide or 5 inches. I mean, high is the other way to look at it. It's going to say not 4 or 4 1/8. If it's 4, then it's going to be 5 or maybe 5 1/2. Depends on exactly the bit and setup. But it really limits you on that. But you'll be much faster. There's no question about it. If you want to knock out 40 drawers, then one of those jigs really is a plus. But if you want one drawer that's 4 and one that's 4 1/8 and one that's 4 3/8, this will let you do it, and most others won't. Ivan.
Is there, I'm thinking about your cutting the mortise and dropping it down on the bit. Is there a maximum depth, and does that arc affect how straight up and down the end of that mortise is on that end?
Okay, so the question is, how deep can you cut a mortise in this method? And if so, what effect does this pivoting onto the cutter do in terms of the straight up ends of the mortise? So it turns out that you're cutting inside the mortise. It gets its maximum length when it's flat. So when you run back and forth, you reach the full extent and you haven't overrun anything by doing that tilt down technique. How deep you can go, I think that's limited by the hardness of the wood and the strength of the cutter. So it would be similar to just the question of routing like with a handheld router and a jig. You're putting a lot of side thrust when you cut pushing a router bit, that's extended a long way from its collet. So you don't want to take deep bites. So I would say on hardwoods, 1/4 of an inch is probably about as much as I would want to cut at any one pass, whether on this technique or on a regular thing. Softwoods could go a little bit more, but you needed to go in steps if you're doing a deep mortise.
You also have the limit of your router bits.
Yeah, the router bits are usually too long to be fully safe under high load, so you can't trust them to say if it's that long I'm allowed to do that in one pass. But nonetheless, your deepest bit is going to be 2 inches or less in most cases.
You can pre-drill here too.
You can pre-drill your mortises. You take a lot of stress off the bit, increase your accuracy, increase your speed. So that's an option.
Since you got the domino, do you actually use mortise and tin?
I do. I love the domino. The domino is a brilliant machine. It is just great. But it cuts 5 sizes of dominoes. I cut 50 sizes of things over the course of a couple of years. So when the domino works, I sure reach for it first. But plenty of my designs, there's a reason something's too small, something's too big. The domino isn't the answer in every case for me. I'm ready to stop.